A part of me is just blown away by how this series has managed to go on for as long as it has. I think we've gotten to the point where the creator of Syberia just stopped giving a fuck about what the customer thought of his games and just kept pressing on regardless. And I don't want to shit on the guy since he actually passed away during development of The World Before, since I kind of respect wanting to do what you want to do without worrying about pleasing other people. But this can lead to a very negative extreme, as we saw in the case of Limbo of the Lost, which was a game made by Majestic Studios for Majestic Studios, and they didn't give a fuck about what anyone else aside from them thought about that game, and look what happened there. And while I'm certainly not putting Syberia as a series in the same category as Limbo of the Lost, because Jesus Christ the musical, now returning for a limited time at most West End theatres, was that game a special kind of shit, I do have to be honest and remind everyone of what I thought regarding the previous games in this series. Now, you might have noticed that I tend to open up these rant videos with a look at the rest of the series first, and this is mainly to give context as to where I might be coming from later when I raise certain points, or where I feel that it fits where compared to the other games. I've played the Syberia games in order, and after watching all of my previous rants on those games, I still stand by what I said and my opinion on them hasn't changed. Syberia 1 wasn't a bad game as such, but it was so incredibly dull. There was a lot of bullshit regarding what the game expected of you, and what you had to do in order to progress the story, and it ended on a cliffhanger that didn't really justify everything that we'd been through. Syberia 2 moved more into the bad game territory than the first one did, in that it felt like it was actively taking the piss out of the player. There was more weird bullshit going on and more random events that would usually be considered a big deal if they happened in real life, but the characters in game here didn't seem to batter an eyelid, and with an ending that had been built up over 2 games, only to be covered in one tiny cutscene that didn't really tell us anything. And then there was Syberia 3. Hands down, one of the worst games of 2017. Anything that could have been seen as a redeeming feature from the previous 2 games was thrown out the window in favour of dialing up the bullshit to 11. A terribly optimised and buggy game with ridiculous crap happening at almost every turn. I rewatched my Syberia 3 rant recently, and I was trying to recall if there was anything about that game that I could have said, well, at least this part was okay. But there wasn't. It was all shit. Literally all of it was shit. And I thought at the time, despite the game ending on yet another cliffhanger where Kate Walker gets captured by mercenaries that are trying to track her down, and then we got an unnecessary Oscar-focused DLC, that maybe that would have been the end of Syberia. Nope, introducing Syberia The World Before. The World Before has 2 storylines, and thus we change between 2 characters every so often. The first storyline takes place in 1937 in several locations, though mainly in a town called Wagen, which is a fictional town set somewhere in Central Europe near the Alps. In this timeline, you follow a character called Dana Rose, an 18-year-old musical prodigy who looks like she's set on track to launch a successful musical career. But while I realise that all of this game is taking place at the same time as Amnesia Rebirth, and what's the odds of me talking about the previous video twice in a row? Dana's future, on the other hand, as well as the rest of the continent's future, is thrown into jeopardy as a fascist movement known as the Hang on, what? Why can't I say the word This is bullshit, why can't we say that? So what am I supposed to call them instead? The Brown Shadow. Okay, that's an odd choice of words. Yes, they did smear Europe in shit for about a decade, but apart from how the fascist military branch during their rise to power were known both as stormtroopers, not to be confused with stormtroopers, and the brown shirts, then I'm not sure exactly where this name came from, but whatever, they're called the Brown Shadow in this game. Anyway, they're gaining a lot of political power in Central Europe, and they hate everyone who isn't Germanic, especially anyone of Dana's ethnic group known as the Jew. Oh come on! Now you're being unreasonable, considering that you have the word Jew displayed on one of the computers later in the game! And while the characters in-game are hoping that this Brown Shadow movement doesn't gain any momentum, and the rest of us with 2020 hindsight are awkwardly looking away, we pretty much know how this one is going to go down. As for the second storyline, we find ourselves in a Russian slave mine being run by fascists in the modern day. And it is here where we are reunited with the one, the only, American lawyer from New York, America with an American passport herself, Kate Walker. Although she's not referred to as Kate Walker anymore since the developers realised that was dumb as fuck, so now she's just known as
Walker. Kate Walker.
So a year has passed since this happened.
Kate Walker.
And it turns out that the paramilitary group that wanted to capture Kate Walker was only after her for cheap labour and for nothing plot related. In fact, they just dumped her in a mine and told her to work, effectively retconning everything about that group that Syberia 3 established. In fact, this game very quickly retcons a lot of things that Syberia 3 brought up, but also manages to make a mess of it while doing so. In the previous game, there's a private investigator who's constantly on your tail but never catches you, and going into Syberia the world before, from which point on I'm just going to call Syberia 4, but I was like, so what happened to that guy? Well, it turns out that he's still out there. While you're playing as Walker Kate Walker, you can open up your scrapbook that the fascists didn't confiscate for some reason, and you'll notice that the dude from before, who was following you, is still following you. But the weirdest thing is that despite Kate Walker being locked up in a mine for the past year, she's got up-to-date journal entries from this guy? Where's she getting this from? In fact, you get a lot of these updates appear in your scrapbook, yet he never actually gets mentioned or appears in the game, so why didn't the devs just not bring him up in the first place? So anyway, Kate Walker has been touring the mines for the past year as a slave, along with her sweet Katyusha, who is, okay, let's go down the chair list, shall we? A Russian Marxist lesbian punk rocker, wow, gotta love that symbolism, huh? Who has also been enslaved here. I can just imagine the devs being like, okay, Kate Walker needs a close friend. So what's the complete opposite of a Nazi? One day, Kate Walker gets a letter telling her that you know how she's been running away from all of her responsibilities back home in order to go on a selfish adventure? Yeah, well, your mum's dead now. Has been for several years, in fact. Naturally, Kate Walker takes the news really well by having a psychotic breakdown and angrily mines her way into an abandoned tunnel where her and her lesbian lover, with an obvious death flag above her head, find a train there. They quickly realise that this train dates back to the Second World War and was actually owned by the National Socialists. National Socialists, huh? That's quite a mouthful. I wonder if there's a shorter word we could use instead. You investigate the train but only find out two things. 1. Fascists bad, lesbians good. And 2. That there's a load of stolen treasure on board one of the carriages. And as we begin to not stuff our pockets with gold, because it's not like we're escaping a slave camp with nothing to our names or anything, our dear sweet Katyusha comes across an NFT of someone who looks like Kate Walker but not really. So Kate Walker swipes it. Why she chose to steal that one painting and not any of the money is beyond me, but sure, this is all stolen treasure, and I get the impression that Kate Walker doesn't want to take anything since it technically belongs to families already, but then she takes this painting anyway. You're already a thief by this point, you might as well take some gold coins with you to make sure you don't starve on your way out. Anyway, our beloved sweet Katyusha's death flag begins flashing, and a fascist pops out and shoots her. So you make like a dead bird and hit the road, and now for the point of Kate Walker's side of the story. You are trying to find out who this girl in the painting is, which the player will have already realised that it's Dana Rose. Now this isn't the only thing you'll have figured out, because there's a big plot twist in this game. But just because it's a plot twist, doesn't mean that it's going to be a surprise. In fact, the plot twist in this game is so obvious that it's got its own advertising budget, it's got a sponsorship deal with Coca-Cola, and rumour has it that Elon Musk is going to buy it out next after Twitter. Because before our forever adored Katyusha, who will always be remembered, died, she mentioned how the girl in the painting looked like Kate Walker, and this is right after Kate Walker learnt that her mum was dead. And since Dana Rose is a playable character, you add 2 and 2 together and that equals Dana Rose as Kate Walker's grandmother. So that means that after the whole being an ivory mine slave plotline gets wrapped up, we're actually following Kate Walker on quite the personal journey. Spoilers for the rest of the game coming up, by the way. Kate Walker's story pretty much follows on the hind legs of Dana's story, so really it's Dana who becomes the star of the show here, so might as well talk about her story from now on. So Dana's story is cut up into pieces as we jump from location and time each time. Dana's side of the story is really told whenever Kate Walker comes across a document regarding Dana and her actions, and what takes place during Dana's playable sections is really what Kate Walker is reading in the present. As the Brown Shadow, and we've got to call him that since we can't use the N-word for some reason, and please for the love of God do not take that out of context. As they begin to gain more power, Dana leaves the town of Vargan and gets a summer job at a retreat in the mountains. While there, she meets a guy who, along with his team, are searching for a mystical land to the east where they believe that all manner of strange and wondrous creatures live, and perhaps the missing link too. And before you all start getting excited and thinking that they're talking about the land of Siberia that this series is named after, then no, it's not there because that would have actually been a good idea. Instead, they're talking about the Himalayas or some shit, I don't know. Before the team sets off on their expedition, Dana and a guy called Leon begin to get along quite well because it turns out that one of them is female and the other is male, which means that they need to bang first before he leaves for the east. The expedition, however, doesn't particularly go well because they come across what the game calls a Goron, which is supposed to be the missing link, but is basically a monkey. But the Brown Shadow supervisor wants to capture it, and Leon isn't cool with that. So they basically do Captain America Civil War, and Leon is tied up before he escapes. Dana is upset because her boy toy is presumably dead, but then he isn't, so they bang some more and she gets pregnant. Then Leon dies for real, and so does Dana's baby, but not really. Dana's side of the story is quite tragic in that although the Second World War eventually comes to an end and she survives it, the man she loved died, and the daughter she gave birth to she also thought had died, but it turns out that after she had given birth at an asylum, another family had made an arrangement with her now dead parents to take the baby for themselves, since the baby was a bastard, and they felt that the baby would have ruined Dana's potential musical career. Then when Dana was a lot older, having moved to America, she learned that her daughter had survived and had gone on to have her own family, and there's what's supposed to be a touching moment where old Dana walked into Kate Walker's room while she was still a child, and they played the piano together, but I thought that scene was really awkward because what has essentially happened is some random woman has broken into this house, gone into the child's bedroom, started playing the piano, and then left again. 10 out of 10 for trying, 2 out of 10 for being tone deaf. This pretty much marks the end of Dana's side of the story, and as I sat back after all of that and looked at it as a whole, I came to a shocking realisation. Guys, this game is actually good. I can't believe I'm saying this, but despite some of the things I've already said, and don't get me wrong, we've not even begun to talk about the bullshit parts of this game, but taking everything as a whole, I can't believe I'm actually telling you all that I thought that Syberia the World Before is a good game. They did it. Those crazy bastards finally did it and made a good Syberia game. Kind of. So let's talk about the good stuff first. The big attraction to be had here is by far the story itself. It's by no means a masterpiece, and I'll explain its biggest failings later on, especially when we're talking about the ending. Now, I felt that Syberia 1, 2 and 3 were the bollocks adventures of Kate Walker. There was no meaningful point to those games other than the pursuit of selfish adventure. Syberia 4, on the other hand, is a much more meaningful, emotional and personal journey that is specific to both Kate Walker and Dana Rose. There are many moments that really tug on your heartstrings here, and even more so if you stop to consider that you at home might either know someone or have someone in the family that has gone through something very similar to this. For the most part, it's a very real story. It's a very sad story. It's a story that's not about the big leaders or the military powers, but rather the little person caught up in the middle of it, and how a bright future can be shattered in a moment, leaving you to pick up the broken pieces and put together something that vaguely resembles a life. And to follow in this journey many years after the fact, and know that this was one of your ancestors, it's hard to remain completely emotionally detached from it all, and I can't believe I'm saying this about a Syberia game of all things. Dana is a nice girl that gets put through a terrible ordeal and gets cheated out of a life that she deserved, and there's no justice for her once the dust has settled. I also really liked how Dana's story is told, in that when Kate Walker comes across a document that talks about Dana, you can then switch to her, which is a feature that is sometimes required during certain puzzles. For example, there's a few instances where Kate Walker is trying to gain access to something or to a particular area, but the answers are nowhere to be found. So instead, you switch to Dana, and it's only in her timeline are you able to find the answers that you're looking for. I thought this was a novel way of completing puzzles that of course has been done in other games before this, but never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be seeing it here. The atmosphere in this game is also really good. Throughout Dana's half of the story, there's this foreboding feeling that everything is about to fall apart at any moment, which we as the player knows it eventually will, while during Kate Walker's half, there's this sad and somber feeling that the scars of war are still very much there, and while everyone is trying to get on with their lives have been changed forever. It's an interesting concept done well here, in that while the player knows that the Second World War is about to kick off any second, the characters in-game aren't aware of this and are trying to stay hopeful. It's admirable for us to see that they're trying to stay strong, despite knowing that their hope means nothing considering what's about to happen. A part of me wants to say that this should have been a standalone title and had nothing to do with Syberia, and if that were the case, I'd be willing to consider giving this game a 9 or even 10 out of 10. Unfortunately, I can't do that, however, because I'm afraid to say that despite the praise I've just given this game, it is still a Syberia game, and therefore it needed to include aspects that were complete bollocks. The feeling I got here, and I have a theory of which I'll explain in a minute, was that this game was mainly focused on this really deep and emotional story, but then occasionally remembered what gaming series this is, and completely lost sanity for a moment by including something that felt more at home with the trash in Syberia 3 than being in here. The biggest one is actually in Dana's half of the story, where it turns out that the monkey that Leon saved is capable of speaking human languages, learnt to speak English from Leon, and then came back with him to help out in World War II, being dressed up in humans' clothes and adopting the name Ludwig. He even becomes an infamous fighter and a figure of terror for the Brown Shadow, and is it just me, or does this seem like something out of Monkey News from the Ricky Gervais show?
Oh, chimpanzee that monkey news!
Alright, so, back in, like, World War II or something.
Oh, yeah.
The Nazis. Well, you can't actually call them Nazis for some reason, it was the Brown Shadow.
Right.
They were, you know, they were doing some bad stuff.
Oh, no.
So the people of Wagen needed to, like, make the Brown Shadow fear them, since they're outnumbered. So anyway, after some time, the Brown Shadow began getting terrorized by this one fella. The resistance were like, go blow up some guns or something. So you go blow up some guns for them. Go and kill some officers. So you go and do that.
Why did they get Spider-Man?
Yeah, call Spider-Man.
Yeah, cool Spider-Man.
So this guy, you know, he means business. And the Brown Shadow are looking for him, trying to capture him, because of all the stuff he's done. And they're all like, oh, who is this guy? And even Kate Walker's wondering that as well. Well, you find his room near the end of the game. So you go in there and meet him. Anyway, turns out, alright, you're a monkey.
You're an idiot!
Yeah, in the space of about 5 years, they managed to teach this non-human creature how to fluently speak English, how to read, write, dress itself, give it a sense of fashion, and trained it in the arts of modern warfare. Yet it takes us nearly 15 years to give a child basic education? Yeah, I'm not buying that. Also, I found some of the character interactions hard to buy in this game too. There were several conversations where the immersion was broken because people don't talk like this. There were at least 2 occasions where Kate Walker would approach someone and ask for their help, and this NPC would be like, "Look, I can't help you now. Come back some other time. I need to get all of this work done by sundown or I'll fucking explode. Can't you see? I'm extremely busy." Oh, I am sorry for being rude, and I can see that you're the player character. Okay, I'll give you all the time you need. Don't worry about all those things I said I needed to get done just now. I've changed my mind about all of that. I only said those things to give you the impression that I have a personality, despite being a disposable character that you'll never speak to again after this conversation has ended. At least the voice acting was leagues better here than it was in Syberia 3, although having said that, if there is to be another Syberia game, please do not let there be another Syberia game. Can we at least get a new voice actor for Kate Walker? I'm not trying to be mean here, but her voice actor sounds way older than Kate is supposed to be. I'm also pretty sure that there's one character who's introduced to us as a decent guy, and we speak to him like once or twice, but then the rest of the story proceeds to shit on him because it turns out that he collaborated with the Brown Shadow, and I agree, f*** that guy. But going by my one and only interaction with him, I'm getting mixed messages from the game regarding this one. But speaking of characters, I have to say, it was such a breath of fresh air to play this game and not have a particular robot drag everything down and raise my stress levels. Oh, my bad, I've already done that joke before. Okay, on the topic of Oscar, I have good news and I have bad news. The bad news is that he's in it.
Oscar,
But the good news is that he's hardly in it, and even when he is, I think with the exception of his first scene in this game, where he's in the body of what I think might be a mechanical hedgehog, and you have to run about the place chasing him, only to lose him down a sewer grate, where he presumably goes off to play with the rest of the clowns, Oscar wasn't a giant cunt in this game for once. He's mainly used as a puzzle item to help you get through certain sections, and there's even 1 or 2 times where you actually get to control him. Incidentally, for anyone wondering, yes, he stays as a hedgehog for the entire game, which I most definitely prefer, except for that one time where, despite the fact that you promise him that you'll get him a human-shaped robot body ASAP, and then near the end of the game you find one, he immediately goes back to his hedgehog form the moment you're done there. I did love the stupidity in Kate Walker's words when she said something to the effect of, "I've already lost everyone I love, I'm not going to lose you, Oscar." All the people you love, huh? You mean all the people you left back in America while you were off on a bunch of selfish adventures, including leaving your mum behind? Or are you purely referring to our heavenly darling gone but not forgotten sweet Katyusha, who was in like 2 scenes but 1 impact she left on us, huh? And while we're talking about Oscar, I don't quite understand why he needed to be in this game just because Kate Walker was in it. Ultimately, Oscar is just a travelling companion by this point, and not exactly a useful one considering his track record. And while he was actually a lot more helpful in this one, I'm sure Kate Walker would have found a way of overcoming whatever obstacles before her without his help. However, this leads me neatly onto one of my biggest gripes about this game. The lack of problems. Almost every conflict, problem, and confrontation that Kate Walker is faced with in this game seems to sort itself out on its own. When you first activate Oscar, he flees into a sewer, leaving Kate Walker to lament over how lonely she is, but instead of going to look for him and having that be a thing, he just randomly turns up later on of his own accord. Kate Walker runs out of leads on where to look for the next part of Dana's story, so an NPC shows up and literally tells her what to do next. Kate Walker runs out of fuel for her stolen motorcycle and has no more money on her. Not to worry, the innkeeper will let you stay for free. Oh, and the tram system is free as well. There's also a scene where Kate Walker gives into pressure and makes a phone call back home, and she calls the person who sent her the original letter about her mum being dead, with a letter saying, "Call me when you can, we need to talk urgently, it's important." But when she finally does make that phone call to Olivia, the conversation goes like this. "Kate? Is that you?"
That's your letter, Olivia.
"You're a fucking piece of shit, Kate, I hope you know that. Everyone back home hates you. If you were on fire, I wouldn't even shit on you, let alone piss on you to put it out."
Olivia, please.
No, you know what else, Kate? I killed your dog, and then I ate it. And then I sold your house to flat earthers. And they thought your taste in interior decor was shit, and we all laughed about it together. And one of them called you a c***. But then right at the end of the game, and we will talk about the ending in a bit, Kate Walker decides to come home after all. So you call Olivia and tell her that, but instantly she's like, "Oh my god, Kate, that's such wonderful news! You're making the right choice. I'm so proud of you, Kate." Oh, and Kate, I love you, okay?
Never mind.
So there's a massive potential conflict resolved before it's even begun. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty much like how it was in Syberia 3. This game plays almost like a walking simulator as is, considering that all you really do is walk about the place and occasionally click on stuff. It's not quite a point-and-click game anymore, but somewhere between that and a walking simulator. I mean, there is a lot of walking involved, so I guess it does put the walk back into Kate Walker. There are occasions where you come across items that will be used for different puzzles, but thankfully, it's not like it used to be in previous games where you pick up a Russian doll halfway through the game, hold on to it until the very end of the game where it's used to fool a penguin, because sure, that's clearly what went through all of our minds when we first picked it up. I can't believe I'm still complaining about that puzzle all these years later. Items are usually obtained during or just before the same puzzle that it'll be used in, which makes way more sense, and puzzles are more logic-based this time round. If you've ever done an escape room in real life, then it's those kind of puzzles, so no complaints from me regarding that. Now, earlier on I mentioned that I had a theory as to why this game's story is mostly good, but then goes, well, Syberia in other places. Now, I said at the start of the video, the original creator of this story died during the game's development, and while I really don't want to disrespect him at this time, what I believed happened was that this was originally going to be about finding yetis and almost human-like apes and shit, but then the creator passed away mid-development, leaving the team to look at each other like, well, do we keep going with what he wanted, or do we write, like, an actual good story instead? Because that's how it comes across. Syberia 2 kept things in the spirit of Syberia 1. Syberia 3, despite being terrible, kept things in the spirit of the previous two games. In Syberia the World Before, however, about 95% of the game doesn't feel like it fits in the series. It's only the 5% sections where things get ridiculous does it feel like we're playing a Syberia game. The part with the Goron really didn't feel like it belonged in this game even a little bit, but it did, however, feel like something you'd expect to happen in a Syberia game. It felt like it was shoehorned in there for reasons that don't make sense, but I feel that was because this is what the game was originally going to be about, and the dev team wanted to honour the creator's wishes to some degree. That's all a theory though, and I'm not saying any of this is fact. What is a fact, however, is how terrible the ending was. So you have that one scene I mentioned earlier where Dana goes to the Walker's house, plays the piano with Kate for a little bit and then leaves, and that marks the ending of Dana's side of the story. But as for Kate, she learns the truth about who Dana really is, and it feels that, aside from Dana's whereabouts, everything has been wrapped up nicely. Kate Walker decides to make that final phone call to Olivia and boards a train to go to the airport and head home to face the music finally. Now, I have a confession to make here. I was desperately hoping that after boarding the train and taking her seat, that Kate Walker would have broken down into tears having come to the end. That this entire journey of hers through this game had been her way of avoiding having to deal with the grief of her mother's passing, and now that it's all over, the grief would have kicked in full force and she would have had to been open about this to Oscar. Oscar would have then asked her, once she'd calmed down, if she regretted going on her adventures, to which Kate would have reflected on everything that has happened, admitted that she was impulsive, negligent, selfish, and childish, but that learning about Dana's life story has helped her grow as a person, and that though she's ready to take responsibility, the lessons that she has learned along the way has made her a better person, so she does not regret a single moment of it. The train pulls away, cut to credits, and you would have had one true review bawling his eyes out and giving a standing ovation to a masterpiece of an ending, followed by a 10 out of 10 rant. In conclusion, you need to buy this game ASAP. But that's not what happened. Instead, Kate Walker gets on the train, Oscar asks her if she regrets going on her adventures, to which Kate just goes, well, that's just who I am, I guess. Looks out of the window and sees another train, figures out where Dana might be, but instead of staying in her goddamn seat and going home to take responsibility, I start screaming the word no over and over again at the PC monitor as Kate Walker gets up out of her seat, gets off the train, and boards this other one for yet another fucking adventure. The monkey's on there and speaks to her, and Kate's like, so what happened to that one character who once sold you lot out to the Brown Shadow? And the monkey's like, she's dead. And Kate's just like,
what a story, Mark.
And then roll to credits. Syberia 4, what the fuck is wrong with you? You had it! You had the perfect ending in the palm of your hands, and you threw it away in order to be Syberia! You did a Syberia! Why, Beria, why? What a shit ending! It was basically the ending from the first game, except this one had a talking monkey in it. And while there are a lot of things I can think of that can be improved with the addition of a talking monkey, a story about the horrors of the Second World War and the lives it destroyed is not one of them! Fuck! I just don't get it! Everything was there for this to have been a 10 out of 10 game. It came so damn close to getting there, but it decided to throw it all away because it occasionally remembered that this was a Syberia game, so let's just snort a load of coke and include a load of bollocks because that's what we do here. Haha, fuck you. Okay, deep breaths for the conclusion. Here we go. In conclusion, no one is more shocked than I am when I say that Syberia the World Before comes as a recommendation from me. The good news is that you don't need to have played the previous games to understand this one, though it might help to understand why there's some automaton stuff, and who Oscar is exactly. The World Before tells a powerful yet sad tale about what could have been but was never meant to be, as well as undertones of deep emotional wounds and the desire to forge on despite what has happened. This game tells a very real and very human story, and it's quite terrifying to know that this story may well be relatable to many of you out there, and this game might even mean more to you than it did to me, if you do fall into this category. The atmosphere is really good, and the gameplay, though not being new or remotely groundbreaking in any way, works just fine and quite well in places. However, if you have played a Syberia game prior to this, then this game does suffer from the odd Syberia moment. For anyone who hasn't played a Syberia game before, then this game does suffer from the odd lapse of insanity before having laudanum forced down its throat and chilling the fuck out in the corner while it trips for a bit. And despite this coming as a recommendation from me, I personally hope that this signals the end of the Syberia series. I think it's ended on the best possible note it can, so now's the time to call it quits. I personally don't want to cover another Syberia game, since I found each one mentally draining for several reasons. The world before is no exception, but that's mainly for good reasons, though as explained, there are some bad reasons too. This is not a perfect game, and it sure as hell is not worth the asking price right now. Let it go on sale, and if you're interested, then go for it. But my emotions were all over the place when I played this one, so be warned if you decide to pick it up for yourself. When I first talked about Syberia 1, I didn't think we'd still be here years later talking about this series, and I really don't want to anymore. Let's just put this series to bed now and move on to other things, because if this series has any dignity, it'll stop right here. Because the only alternative is Syberia 5, Kate Walker and Merlin go to space or some shit. See ya!